Imagine the horrifying moment. A destitute woman with only her last $10 in her pocket, money meant for milk and bread for her asthmatic son coughing through another freezing San Francisco night. Yet she spends every single dollar of it to buy aspirin and save a man collapsing in a foggy parking lot. Everyone else stands frozen in fear, whispering, "That's Vincent Moretti, the most notorious Mafia boss in the city. Touch him and you're dead." But she doesn't know, and she drops to her knees, cradles his head in her lap, and whispers, "Stay with me. Please don't go." What she never could have imagined, the very man the entire city fears, is the one whose world indirectly took her husband from her years ago. And from the moment she saved his life, he falls madly, passionately in love with her, willing to trade his entire criminal empire to protect and make amends to her and her son. Can love truly blossom from blood, guilt, and forgiveness? Stay with us for this real-life fairy tale filled with tears and heart-pounding emotion, the story of Emily and Vincent. Before we dive into this chilling and mysterious story, please remember to subscribe to the channel Alex Truths and like this video. Every subscription, like, and share from you is a huge spiritual gift and an incredibly profound source of motivation for the channel's growth, so we can continue bringing wonderful videos every day to everyone. There would be no greater joy than receiving your love and support through the comments you leave right below this video. Comments sharing your emotions or telling us which province or city you're living and working in while listening to this story. All right, let's continue together and immerse ourselves in this amazing, captivating story that's filled with deep emotions. Emily Harper pushed through another grueling double shift at a small diner in the Tenderloin district of San Francisco, California. Her slender body weary from the relentless fog that rolled in from the bay and chilled everything to the bone. It was late December in the year 2025, and the damp winter air clung to the streets like a shroud, seeping through the thin walls of rundown buildings and turning every breath into a visible cloud of exhaustion. Emily was 30 years old, a widow struggling to raise her 8-year-old son Jacob alone after her husband, a dedicated police officer, had lost his life years ago in a violent street incident tied to organized crime. She was fair-skinned, with roots in an Irish-American family that had once known better days, but now hardship had hollowed her features, leaving shadows under her eyes and a fragility that made her seem older than her years. Her existence was one of profound, unrelenting poverty, the kind that gnawed at the soul day after day. The cramped studio apartment she rented in a decaying building near the Tenderloin had drafty windows patched with tape, a single hot plate for cooking, and a refrigerator that often stood nearly empty. Jacob's asthma flared constantly in the damp air, his small body racked with coughs that kept them both awake through the long nights. Medical bills stacked up like accusations on the rickety table. Treatments she delayed, inhalers she rationed, specialist visits she couldn't afford. Emily walked miles each day to work, her worn coat from a charity drive barely holding off the wind, because public transit fares ate into the little she earned, and her old car had long since been repossessed. Rent was always late, eviction notices fluttered under the door like threats, and some nights she skipped meals entirely, her frame growing thinner, malnourished, her hands trembling from lack of sleep and constant worry. Still, Emily endured with a quiet, unbreakable resilience, the sort forged in the fires of having nowhere else to turn. She spoke softly and politely to the diner's customers, her voice timid as she took orders and refilled coffee mugs, even when her legs ached and despair pressed heavy on her chest. After tucking Jacob into their shared bed with its thin blankets, she would sit under the faint glow of a thrift store lamp and jot in her small notebook the 3 things she was grateful for, a habit passed down from her grandmother. 1. Jacob smiled today despite the cough. 2. We have a place to sleep tonight. 3. A new day might bring hope. The words often blurred through tears, but the ritual anchored her against the waves of humiliation and fear that threatened to pull her under. High above the city, in a magnificent penthouse atop a towering building in Pacific Heights, with sweeping views of the Golden Gate Bridge shrouded in mist and the dark expanse of the San Francisco Bay, Vincent Moretti stood at his expansive windows, gazing out over the glittering lights below. He was 43, fair-skinned, with classic Italian-American traits, dark hair touched with silver at the temples, sharp blue eyes that held command and depth. Vincent was the powerful boss of San Francisco's long-standing organized crime family, rooted in the historic North Beach Italian community, a syndicate that had quietly thrived for generations through legitimate fronts like upscale North Beach trattorias, waterfront import businesses, and construction firms that secured major city projects. Opulence enveloped him. Polished marble floors from Italy, bespoke furniture in rich leathers, priceless art adorning the walls, a personal chef available at a moment's notice, and a garage filled with luxury vehicles gleaming under soft lights. His influence reached into corners of the city where official power feared to tread. Associates respected him. Rivals approached with caution. Yet deep within, a consuming remorse tore at him relentlessly, a violent inner conflict that surged in the silent hours. Years earlier, during a tense rivalry with an out-of-town faction pushing into Bay Area territories, Vincent had authorized a confrontation that spiraled out of control. An innocent officer, Emily's husband, had been caught in the crossfire. Vincent hadn't known the man's identity at the time, but discovering later the young widow and child left devastated, unleashed a guilt that haunted him like a shadow he couldn't escape. It raged inside him, a fierce turmoil of regret and self-recrimination. He would stride the vast rooms of his penthouse late at night, hands clenched, heart pounding with the weight of lives altered by his decisions. How many solitary visits had he made to quiet Catholic churches in North Beach, lighting candles for the lost, murmuring pleas for absolution that rang empty against his burdens. To seek some balance, Vincent had anonymously established Angela's Hope Foundation, honoring his sister who had passed young from an illness their immigrant family couldn't afford to treat properly. The foundation channeled substantial funds, carefully directed from his enterprises, to aid struggling families with medical needs, rent assistance, and support for widows and children. Countless anonymous donations covered treatments, prevented evictions, gave children opportunities. But the remorse only intensified, a gnawing pain that reminded him, with every quiet success, of the one family he had irreparably harmed. Vincent's smiles were rare now, his eyes carrying a profound sorrow that even his most trusted lieutenants sensed but never mentioned. One foggy December evening, as holiday lights twinkled faintly along Fisherman's Wharf, Vincent concluded a high-stakes discussion with key associates in one of his North Beach restaurants. Tensions simmered, with rivals probing weaknesses along the waterfront routes. Words had been measured, but edged with warning. A brief street standoff earlier that day, men facing off near the Embarcadero, voices low but intense, no blows exchanged, but the threat hanging thick, had left his nerves taut. Vincent chose to drive alone, seeking the fog-shrouded solitude to quiet the storm within. His heart, burdened by years of strain, rich meals, and unending pressure, suddenly rebelled. Intense pain gripped his chest as he pulled into the dimly lit parking lot of a 24-hour pharmacy in a transitional edge of the city, away from his familiar paths. He staggered from his sleek black luxury sedan, loosening his tie, breath coming in sharp gasps beneath the buzzing lights. The ground seemed to shift, numbness radiated through his limbs. He collapsed against the damp pavement, his commanding presence reduced to that of any vulnerable man alone in the chill. A clerk finishing the night shift and a rideshare driver pausing nearby caught sight of him. Murmurs passed. That's Vincent Moretti, the boss from North Beach. Better not get mixed up. His world means trouble. Caution prevailed. They averted their eyes and moved on, leaving him struggling in the mist. Emily was trudging home that same evening. Her shift ended at last, clutching exactly $10, her final amount for basics until the next tips came. The fog wrapped cold fingers around her thin coat, a donation from a local shelter. Her body ached from hours standing, mind foggy with dread over Jacob's worsening cough, and a recent clinic note hinting at complications needing care far beyond her reach. She took the shortcut through the pharmacy lot, her steps hurried against the damp. Then she spotted him, a sharply dressed man slumped on the ground, skin ashen, breaths labored and fading. Shock hit her like ice. Fear and confusion swirled, dizziness threatening as her heart raced. Why had those others ignored him? Who was this stranger? Yet a deeper pull emerged, the echo of her husband's abrupt, unfair end, the conviction that no one deserved to face death abandoned. Her hands shook, a wave of anxiety and curiosity crashing over her, but she could not turn away. Not from this. Emily Harper woke before dawn in the dim, drafty studio apartment in the Tenderloin district of San Francisco. The thin blanket pulled tight around her and Jacob as the December wind whistled through the cracked window pane. It was the 30th of December in the year 2025, and the fog pressed against the glass like a living thing, cold and relentless. The alarm on her old phone buzzed weakly from the floor beside the mattress they shared. Emily reached for it with a trembling hand, silencing it quickly so Jacob could sleep a few more minutes. Her body ached from the double shift the day before, her feet still throbbing inside the worn socks that had holes at the heels. She had not eaten dinner. There had been only enough for Jacob's small bowl of oatmeal, and the emptiness in her stomach was a familiar, gnawing companion. She rose quietly, careful not to disturb her son, and padded across the cold linoleum to the tiny kitchenette. The refrigerator light flickered when she opened the door. Half a carton of milk, 3 slices of bread going stale, a single apple beginning to soften. She stared at it for a long moment, the unfairness of it all pressing down like a weight on her chest. Jacob needed the milk for his cereal. The bread would have to stretch for toast and a sandwich to take to school. There was nothing left for her. Again. She closed the door softly, her throat tightening as tears threatened, but she blinked them back. Crying never filled the cupboards. Emily was 30 years old, but exhaustion and hunger had carved lines around her eyes that made her look older. Her fair skin was pale from too many nights without proper rest, her frame thin and fragile beneath the oversized sweater she wore as a nightshirt. Malnourishment had taken its toll. Her hands shook slightly when she was tired, her steps sometimes unsteady from low blood sugar. Sleep was a luxury interrupted by Jacob's coughing fits and her own racing worries. The walls of the apartment seemed to close in some nights, the peeling paint and water stains on the ceiling, a constant reminder of how far she had fallen since losing her husband. She dressed in the same black pants and white blouse she wore to the diner, both washed so many times the fabric had thinned. Her coat hung by the door, a donation from a church drive last winter, too large for her narrow shoulders, but warm enough when buttoned tight. She checked the small envelope where she kept her tips, exactly $10.37. Rent was due in 2 days, and she was short by more than $200. The landlord had already left another notice under the door. The electricity bill sat unopened beside it. She knew what it said. Shut-off scheduled for the new year if payment wasn't received. Quiet moments like this, in the gray half-light before the city woke, were when the despair felt heaviest. Emily sat at the small folding table, head in her hands, feeling the dizziness that came from standing too quickly on an empty stomach. Why did everything have to be so hard? Why did one tragedy have to lead to another, like dominoes falling in slow motion? She thought of her husband, gone in an instant, caught in violence he had tried to stop, and the life they had planned together, now only a ghost. Tears slipped down her cheeks silently. She wiped them away with the sleeve of her sweater, took a shaky breath, and opened her gratitude notebook. 1. Jacob is still here with me. 2. I have work today. 3. The fog will lift eventually. The words felt hollow, but she wrote them anyway. It was all she had to hold on to. Across the bay, in the rarefied air of Pacific Heights, Vincent Moretti stood at the kitchen island of his penthouse, a cup of espresso cooling untouched in his hand. The city lights sparkled below through the mist, the Golden Gate Bridge a faint orange glow in the distance. His home was a world apart. Heated marble floors, a sub-zero refrigerator stocked with fresh produce and imported cheeses, a dining table that could seat 12 beneath a crystal chandelier. Art worth millions hung on the walls, pieces collected from galleries in New York and Rome. His closet held rows of tailored suits, Italian leather shoes polished to a mirror shine. A private elevator opened directly into his foyer, guarded around the clock. Yet none of it brought peace. The remorse that lived in his chest had grown sharper in recent weeks, a violent tearing that woke him at night in a cold sweat. He had seen another anonymous report from Angela's Hope, a young widow in Oakland whose rent had been covered, whose child's medical treatments were now paid in full, and the relief it should have brought was drowned by memory. Emily Harper. He had learned her name years after the incident, learned about the little boy left fatherless because of a decision he had made in anger. The guilt was no longer a quiet ache. It was a storm, raging and relentless, tearing at the walls he had built around his heart. Vincent set the cup down harder than intended. His reflection in the dark window showed a man successful beyond measure, powerful, wealthy, feared. But the eyes staring back were haunted. He had faced down rivals in tense street confrontations just last week near the Embarcadero. Cars pulling up suddenly, men stepping out with hard stares and low voices, threats veiled but unmistakable. No shots fired, only words sharp as blades, but the tension lingered like smoke. He handled it all with calm authority, yet inside he was unraveling. How many more families would he help anonymously before the scale tipped? How many candles lit in empty churches before forgiveness felt real? He rubbed his chest absently, the spot where pain sometimes flared, a warning, perhaps, from a heart carrying too much for too long. Emily kissed Jacob's forehead gently as he stirred, his small face flushed from another restless night of coughing. "Morning, baby," she whispered, her voice soft and tired. "Time for school soon." He blinked up at her, managing a sleepy smile that broke her heart with its bravery. She helped him dress, gave him the last of the milk on cereal, packed his lunch with the remaining bread and a thin slice of cheese from a food bank donation. There was nothing for herself again, but she smiled anyway. "I'll eat at work," she lied gently when he asked. The walk to the bus stop was bitter cold, the fog thick enough to muffle sounds. Jacob held her hand tightly, his little fingers freezing even through mittens a size too big. At the diner, Emily clocked in early, tying her apron with practiced motions. The morning rush brought families celebrating the holidays, tourists snapping photos of sourdough bread baskets, regulars who tipped generously and others who didn't. She moved between tables with quiet efficiency, her polite "yes, ma'am," and "right away, sir," hiding the dizziness that came when she stood too long without food. By late afternoon, her tips totaled barely enough for bus fare home and a loaf of bread. The manager called her aside, another complaint from a customer about slow service, though she had been running nonstop. "You look tired, Harper," he said, not unkindly but firmly. "Pick up the pace or we'll have to let you go." She nodded mutely, humiliation burning in her throat. How could she move faster when her body was running on nothing? Evening brought the second shift. The diner filled again, the air thick with smells of coffee and grilled onions. Emily's legs trembled by 10 o'clock, her vision blurring at the edges. She counted her tips in the back room, $10 exactly. Enough for milk and eggs tomorrow, if she skipped the bus and walked both ways. She tucked the bills into her coat pocket carefully, as though they might vanish. The walk home after midnight was the hardest. Fog swallowed the streetlights, the wind cutting through her coat. Her steps grew unsteady, hunger and exhaustion making the world tilt. She passed alleyways where shadows moved, heard distant arguments and car doors slamming, reminders of the dangers in this part of the city. Fear prickled her skin, but she kept walking, head down, clutching her small purse. She cut through the dimly lit parking lot of the 24-hour pharmacy for the shortcut home, the same lot where, unbeknownst to her, fate waited in the shape of a collapsed man in an expensive overcoat. Emily's heart was already heavy with the weight of another day survived, another tomorrow looming with its unfair demands. She did not yet know that everything was about to change, that the quiet desperation carving hollows in her soul would soon collide with a remorse just as deep, and that from the ashes of both would rise something fierce, confusing, and overwhelmingly powerful. But in that moment, all she felt was the cold, the hunger, and the quiet, condensed stillness of a woman holding on by the thinnest thread. The fog hung thick over the parking lot of the 24-hour pharmacy on the edge of the Tenderloin, turning the overhead lights into hazy yellow orbs that barely pierced the December chill. It was just past midnight on the 30th of December in the year 2025, and the city had settled into that uneasy quiet between the holiday rush and the new year. Emily Harper's footsteps echoed softly on the damp asphalt as she took her usual shortcut home, her thin coat pulled tight around her narrow shoulders, the $10 bill folded carefully in her pocket like a fragile promise. Her body felt heavier than usual tonight, hunger sharpening every edge, exhaustion dragging at her limbs. The double shift had left her lightheaded, the world tilting slightly with each step. She kept her eyes down, watching for broken glass or puddles that might soak through the holes in her shoes. Jacob would be asleep at the neighbor's, the kind older woman who watched him for a few dollars when Emily worked late. Tomorrow she would pick him up early, make toast with the last bread, and pretend everything was fine. Then she heard it, a ragged, desperate gasp cutting through the fog. Emily stopped, heart lurching. 20 feet ahead, beneath the buzzing fluorescent light, a man was slumped against a sleek, black luxury sedan that gleamed even in the mist. He was well-dressed, an expensive dark overcoat, polished shoes, a silk tie loosened as though in panic. His hand clutched at his chest, fingers digging into the fabric as his face twisted in pain. He slid slowly down the side of the car until he collapsed onto the cold pavement, his broad shoulders hitting the ground with a dull thud. His breaths came in short, terrifying bursts, his fair-skinned face turning gray under the harsh light. Horror flooded Emily like ice water. She stood frozen for a moment, dizziness sweeping over her as shock tightened her throat. A man was dying, right there, alone on the concrete. She took an instinctive step forward, then hesitated as two figures nearby, a night clerk locking the pharmacy door and a rideshare driver leaning against his car, glanced over, recognized something in the fallen man's face, and quickly looked away. "That's Vincent Moretti," the clerk muttered low, just loud enough for Emily to catch. "North Beach. You don't get involved with him." The driver shook his head, got into his car, and pulled away without a backward glance. The clerk disappeared inside, the door locking with a final click. Emily's pulse hammered in her ears. Vincent Moretti. The name carried weight in San Francisco. Whispers in the diner, warnings from neighbors, stories in the local news about influence, power, and shadows. Fear clawed at her, confusion swirling with the fog. This was the kind of man her husband had once investigated, the kind of world that had taken him from her. Every instinct screamed to keep walking, protect herself, protect Jacob. She had enough trouble. She had nothing to give. But the man on the ground let out another choked gasp, his chest barely rising now, his lips turning blue. Emily's eyes filled with sudden tears. She remembered her grandmother's voice from childhood. "Kindness costs nothing, baby. and sometimes it's all we have. She remembered her husband collapsing in the hospital hallway after the shooting, how she had wished someone, anyone, had stopped the bleeding sooner. Her legs moved before her mind caught up. The $10 bill crinkled in her fist as she ran toward the pharmacy door, banging on the glass. "Please, call an ambulance. He's having a heart attack." The clerk peered through, shaking his head. "Lady, you crazy? That's Vincent Moretti. His people will handle it. Stay out of it." She stared at him in disbelief, the unfairness burning like acid. A human being was dying, and fear of a name was enough to let him. Dizziness threatened again as anger and grief collided inside her. She turned back to the man, Vincent, his eyes fluttering, unseeing. His hand twitched weakly against the pavement. Emily dropped to her knees beside him, the cold concrete biting through her thin pants. Her hands shook violently as she pulled out her phone, 1 bar of signal, battery at 8%. She dialed 911, but the call dropped in the fog-choked reception. Panic surged, hot and numbing. She scanned his face up close now, strong features, silver at the temples, lines of strain even in unconsciousness. There was something haunted in the set of his mouth, even in pain. She didn't have time to wonder. Heart attack, aspirin, water. Emily stood on unsteady legs and ran back to the pharmacy door, pounding again. The clerk cracked it open just enough. "Aspirin and a bottle of water. Please, I'll pay." He hesitated, then slid a small bottle of generic aspirin and a water across the counter. $10 even. Her heart sank. That was everything. Milk for Jacob, bread, bus fare. But the man outside had stopped breathing altogether for a terrifying second. She thrust the bill forward without hesitation. The clerk gave no change. She didn't wait for a receipt. Emily raced back, knees nearly buckling, and knelt again in the damp. The fog seemed to press closer, the world narrowing to this single moment. She twisted open the aspirin bottle with trembling fingers, shook 2 tablets into her palm, then opened the water. "Sir," she whispered, her voice soft and timid despite the urgency. "Can you hear me? You need to chew these." Vincent's eyes fluttered open just barely, striking blue, clouded with pain and confusion. He tried to focus on her face hovering above him, pale and thin, framed by strands of hair escaped from her ponytail. For a split second, something pierced through the agony, a flicker of recognition, not of her face, but of the raw kindness in her eyes. It struck him like a blow to the chest, far worse than the heart attack. He had spent years surrounded by fear, loyalty bought with power, respect born of caution. No one approached him without calculation. Yet here was a stranger, a fragile, exhausted woman with nothing, spending her last money to save a man everyone else had abandoned. Guilt, already his constant companion, surged with violent force. Who was she? Why was she doing this? Vincent tried to speak, managed only a wheeze. Emily gently lifted his head, cradling it in her lap despite the cold seeping through her coat. "Chew," she urged again, placing the tablets on his tongue. "Please, help is coming." He chewed slowly, wincing, as she held the water bottle to his lips. A few drops slid down his chin. His hand, large and strong despite the weakness, reached up instinctively and closed around her wrist. Not tightly, but with a desperate grip, as though anchoring himself to the only kindness he had felt in years. In that touch, something electric passed between them. Vincent's heart, failing physically, experienced a different kind of seizure, an overwhelming burning surge that tore through the walls he had built. He did not yet know her name, did not know the full tragedy his past had visited upon her life, but in her terrified, determined eyes, he saw a purity that shamed him, a selflessness that unraveled him. Remorse and longing collided in a storm more fierce than any rival confrontation he had ever faced. He wanted to protect her, to shield her from every cold night, every empty cupboard. The feeling was immediate, passionate, and terrifying in its intensity. Emily felt the strength in his grip even through the weakness, saw the depth in his gaze, and confusion flooded her alongside fear. Who was this man that others fled from, yet whose eyes held such torment? Her own heart raced, not just from adrenaline, but from the strange, disorienting pull of being seen so completely by a stranger in his moment of greatest vulnerability. Sirens finally wailed in the distance, growing louder through the fog. Emily kept her hand on his shoulder, whispering, "Stay with me. You're going to be okay." Vincent's eyes never left her face. Even as consciousness faded, the image of her burned into him. An angel in a worn coat, spending her last dollars on a sinner the world had turned its back on. And in the quiet space between heartbeats, two broken lives began to reach for each other across the vast chasm of wealth and poverty, guilt and grace, fear and unimaginable love. The sirens grew louder, slicing through the thick fog like a lifeline, but Emily Harper barely heard them. She was still on her knees beside the stranger, Vincent Moretti, her thin coat soaked through from the damp pavement, her body trembling from cold, hunger, and the rush of adrenaline that made the world feel unreal. His head rested in her lap, heavier than she expected, his expensive overcoat rough against her frozen fingers. The aspirin had been chewed, the water sipped, but his breathing remained shallow, each rise of his chest a small miracle she willed into being. "Come on," she whispered, her voice soft and pleading, barely above the wind. "Stay with me. Please stay with me." Vincent's eyes opened again, unfocused at first, then locking onto hers with an intensity that stole what little breath she had left. In the harsh fluorescent light, she saw the depth of pain there, not just physical, but something older, deeper, like a storm trapped behind blue glass. His grip on her wrist tightened for a moment, not painful, but desperate, as though she were the only solid thing in a world spinning out of control. A violent wave crashed through him, gratitude, shame, and something fiercer, an immediate, burning protectiveness that tore at every wall he had built around his heart. Who was this woman, thin and shivering, with eyes that held both terror and unbreakable kindness? Why had she spent her last dollars on a man the world feared? The remorse that already gnawed at him daily now roared into a wildfire. He wanted to shield her from every hardship, every cold night, every empty cupboard. The feeling was overwhelming, passionate, and entirely new. Emily felt the shift in his gaze and pulled back slightly, fear flickering alongside confusion. Her heart raced with anxiety. Dizziness threatened again as the reality pressed in. She had just given away the last of her money, the milk for Jacob's breakfast, the bread for tomorrow. What would she tell her son? How would they eat? Humiliation burned hot in her cheeks, mixing with the cold. Yet she could not regret it, not when a life hung in the balance. The ambulance screeched into the lot, lights flashing red and blue through the mist. Paramedics spilled out, moving with practiced urgency. One knelt beside her, gently lifting Vincent's head from her lap. "Ma'am, did you give him aspirin?" Emily nodded, her voice timid and small. "Yes, 2 tablets, maybe 5 minutes ago." The paramedic's eyes widened with approval. "That was smart. You probably saved his life." They worked quickly, oxygen mask, monitors, IV line. Emily stood on unsteady legs, numbness spreading through her limbs as shock settled deeper. She watched them load Vincent onto the stretcher, his eyes seeking hers one last time through the mask. He lifted a weak hand, mouthing words she couldn't hear. "Thank you." A sleek black SUV roared into the lot moments later, tires hissing on wet pavement. A broad-shouldered man in an expensive coat jumped out. Marco, Vincent's most trusted lieutenant. His face was pale with fear as he rushed to the stretcher. "Boss! Vincent!" The paramedics briefed him quickly. Marco turned to Emily, taking in her thin frame, the worn coat, the exhaustion written across her pale features. His voice was rough but grateful. You helped him?" She nodded, guarded now, curiosity warring with fear. He needed help, that's all." Marco stared at her as though she had performed a miracle. Most people crossed the street to avoid Vincent Moretti. Yet this stranger, this fragile woman, had knelt in the cold and spent what little she had. Something shifted in his expression. Respect and something protective. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple white card with only a phone number and a small embossed crest, a winged crown. "The boss, he's going to want to thank you himself," Marco said quietly. "Please, call this number tomorrow." Emily took the card with shaking fingers, the heavy paper feeling foreign against her chilled skin. She slipped it into her coat pocket, planning already to throw it away the moment she was alone. Men like Vincent Moretti didn't bring good into lives like hers. They brought shadows. Marco hesitated, glancing at her worn shoes, the hole in one sole visible even in the dim light. "You got kids?" The question caught her off guard. She nodded slowly. "A son, Jacob. He's 8. He studied her face, the dark circles, the thin cheeks, the quiet dignity despite everything. "You walked here?" "From the diner. It's not far." Marco's jaw tightened. He reached for his wallet, thick with cash, and began counting bills. "Let me give you something. For the aspirin, for your trouble." "No." Emily stepped back, her voice firm despite its softness. "Please, I didn't do it for money." He stopped, staring at her as though she spoke a language he had forgotten. "Then why?" "Because he was dying," she said simply, tears pricking her eyes again, and no one else stopped. Marco slowly put the wallet away. He memorized her face, the pale skin, the tired eyes that somehow still held light. "You're a good person, miss. Don't let anyone tell you different." He climbed into the ambulance as it pulled away, sirens fading into the fog. Emily stood alone in the empty lot, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like distant insects. The cold wrapped around her more fiercely now, seeping into her bones. She had nothing left, no money for food, no bus fare, only a 2-mile walk home through the dark. Her legs nearly gave out as the full weight hit her. Dizziness swept in waves. She leaned against the pharmacy wall, breath coming in shallow bursts. What had she done? Jacob would wake hungry. The landlord's notice waited under her door. And now she had tangled, however briefly, with a world that had already taken everything from her once. Yet even as fear and despair clawed at her heart, a small, stubborn warmth lingered. She had saved a life tonight. That had to count for something. The walk home was brutal. The fog swallowed streetlights, the wind cut through her coat like knives. Each step felt heavier, her empty stomach cramping, her mind replaying the man's eyes, those piercing blue eyes that had looked at her not with power, but with something raw and pleading. Confusion twisted inside her. Why had he held her wrist so desperately? Why had his lieutenant looked at her like she had done something impossible? By the time she reached her building, it was nearly 2 a.m. The hallway light was burned out again. She climbed the stairs in darkness, key shaking in the lock. Inside, the apartment was freezing. The heat had been turned low to save on the bill. Jacob slept curled tightly under the thin blanket on their shared mattress, his small chest rising and falling with the faint wheeze of asthma. Emily sank onto the edge of the bed, exhaustion crashing over her like a wave. She pulled the white card from her pocket and stared at it under the dim phone light. Just a number, a crest. She should throw it away. Instead, she set it on the small table beside her gratitude notebook. Her hand trembled as she opened to a new page. 1. Jacob is safe and warm tonight. 2. I helped someone who needed it. 3. Tomorrow is a new day. The words blurred through tears. She lay down fully clothed, pulling the blanket over both of them, her body shaking from cold and emotion. Sleep came in fits, haunted by blue eyes and the weight of a stranger's hand on her wrist. Across the city, in a private hospital room overlooking the bay, Vincent Moretti lay hooked to monitors, oxygen steadying his breath. The doctors had confirmed it. The aspirin administered in those critical minutes had saved him from catastrophic damage. He stared at the ceiling, the image of the woman burned into his mind, her pale face, her trembling hands, the selflessness that had pierced straight through every layer of armor he possessed. The remorse that had tormented him for years now burned with new intensity. He had spent a lifetime building walls of power and wealth, yet a destitute stranger had shown him more humanity in 5 minutes than he had felt in decades. And something else, something fierce and undeniable, had ignited in his chest the moment her eyes met his. Love, immediate and overwhelming, passionate in a way that terrified him. He wanted to find her, protect her, give her everything she had been denied. Marco stood quietly by the door. "We'll find her, boss." She gave a name, Emily Harper. Vincent closed his eyes, the name settling into his heart like a vow. Emily Harper, the woman who had saved his life with her last $10. And in the quiet darkness of 2 very different worlds, something irrevocable had begun. Emily Harper pushed open the door to her studio apartment just before 3 a.m, the hinges creaking in the stillness like an accusation. The cold from outside followed her in, wrapping around her damp coat and settling into her bones. She closed the door softly behind her, leaning against it for a long moment as dizziness washed over her again, the world tilting from exhaustion and the lingering shock of what had happened. Her legs felt like water. She slid down the door until she sat on the thin, worn carpet, head in her hands, breath coming in shallow, trembling bursts. The apartment was darker and colder than usual. The heat had clicked off hours ago to save on the bill, and the single window rattled faintly in the wind. Jacob slept on the mattress in the corner, curled into a small ball under the threadbare blanket, his breathing a soft wheeze that pierced her heart every time she heard it. Emily watched him in the dim glow from the streetlight outside, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. She had nothing left for breakfast. No milk, no bread, no eggs. The $10 she had carried for days was gone, spent on aspirin for a stranger the entire city feared. Humiliation burned hot and bitter. How would she explain to Jacob? How would they get through tomorrow and the day after, and the endless string of days that always seemed to demand more than she had? The unfairness of it all pressed down until she could barely breathe, working double shifts on her feet until they bled, smiling through the pain, only to come home to empty cupboards and overdue notices. And now this, saving a powerful man's life only to deepen her own desperation. She pulled the white card from her pocket, turning it over in her fingers. Plain, expensive stock. A phone number, a small crest. Marco's words echoed. The boss is going to want to thank you himself. Fear coiled tight in her stomach. Thank you? From Vincent Moretti? The name alone brought back memories of her husband's late nights at work, the worry in his eyes when he spoke of organized crime pushing into new neighborhoods. That world had taken him. Now it had touched her again. Emily stood slowly, legs numb, and moved to the small table. She opened her gratitude notebook with shaking hands, the pages thin and precious, because paper costs money too. 1. Jacob is sleeping peacefully. 2. The man I helped is alive. 3. Tomorrow will come, and we will find a way. She stared at the words until they blurred, then closed the book and placed the card beside it. She should throw it away. She would throw it away. Men like Vincent Moretti did not bring light into lives like hers. Across the city, in a private suite at one of San Francisco's most exclusive hospitals overlooking the bay, Vincent Moretti lay awake, despite the sedatives dripping into his arm. Monitors beeped softly, the room bathed in the warm glow of indirect lighting. Fresh flowers on the side table, sent by associates who feared his displeasure even from a hospital bed. Nurses checked on him every hour, speaking in hushed, respectful tones. Outside the door, 2 of his men stood guard in tailored suits, ensuring no rival would dare approach during this vulnerability. But none of the luxury touched the storm raging inside him. Vincent stared at the ceiling, replaying every second of the parking lot. The cold concrete, the pain tearing through his chest, and then her, Emily Harper. Marco had confirmed the name, had already begun quiet inquiries. A widow, a son, struggling alone in the Tenderloin. The details hit him like physical blows, each one deepening the violent remorse that had haunted him for years. He had known, abstractly, that his past decisions had destroyed families, but now the face of one of those families had knelt beside him in the fog, spent her last money to keep him breathing, looked at him with eyes that held no judgment, only kindness. The inner conflict was excruciating. Guilt roared through him, hotter and more consuming than ever before. He had everything: wealth beyond measure, power that bent the city to his will. And yet, a destitute woman had shown him the depth of humanity he had long believed himself incapable of receiving. And with the guilt came something new, something that terrified him with its intensity. Love. Immediate, fierce, and absolute. It had ignited the moment her trembling hand touched his face, the moment she whispered, "Stay with me." He wanted to find her, lift her out of every hardship, wrap her in safety and warmth for the rest of her life. The feeling was passionate, almost violent in its urgency, tearing apart every careful compartment he had built around his heart. He pressed the call button. Marco appeared instantly. "Find her," Vincent said, voice low but commanding despite the weakness. Everything about her, carefully, no pressure, just find her. Marco nodded. "Already started, boss. She's the real thing." Vincent closed his eyes, her face burned behind his lids. Emily Harper, the woman who had saved him when no one else would. Morning came too soon for Emily. The alarm buzzed at 5:30, dragging her from a shallow, restless sleep filled with dreams of blue eyes and cold pavement. Jacob stirred beside her, rubbing his eyes. "Mommy, I'm hungry." Her heart cracked open. She forced a smile, voice soft and bright despite the ache. "I know, baby. We'll have something special soon." There was nothing. She split the last heel of stale bread, scraping the final smear of peanut butter across it for him. For herself, water. Her stomach cramped painfully, but she hid it. They dressed in the cold, Jacob in his too small coat from last year, Emily in the same clothes from the night before because laundry cost quarters she didn't have. The walk to the bus stop was bitter. Fog still clung to the streets, wind whipped through the buildings. Jacob held her hand tightly, coughing now and then. At the diner, her coworker Maria noticed the exhaustion in her face. "You okay, hun? You look like you haven't slept in days." Emily managed a small smile. "Long night." The morning rush was brutal. Customers complained about slow service. One left no tip at all despite a large order. By noon, her tips totaled barely enough for milk. The manager pulled her aside again. "Harper, you're dragging. If you can't keep up—" "I'm trying," she whispered, voice breaking. Humiliation flooded her. Trying wasn't enough anymore. During her short break, she sat in the back alley, head against the brick wall, the white card burning a hole in her pocket. Doubt gnawed relentlessly. What if calling brought danger? What if ignoring it brought nothing? Her life was already so fragile. One wrong step and everything crumbled. Neighbors began whispering by evening. Word traveled fast in the building. Mrs. Alvarez from downstairs stopped her in the hall. "I heard you helped Vincent Moretti last night." "Girl, what were you thinking? That man's world is poison." Emily's stomach dropped. "He was dying. I couldn't walk away." Mrs. Alvarez shook her head. "Kindness like yours gets taken advantage of. Mark my words, you'll regret it." The words followed Emily into the apartment, into the cold evening, as she tucked Jacob in with promises of better tomorrows she didn't believe. She sat at the table long after he slept, staring at the card. Fear and curiosity warred inside her, quiet, condensed moments of stillness, broken by waves of anxiety that left her dizzy and numb. She did not know that across the city, Vincent lay awake again, her name a prayer on his lips, his heart torn between remorse and a love so fierce it felt like salvation and damnation all at once. And in the heavy silence of a life stretched to breaking, Emily Harper finally picked up her phone. Emily Harper stood in the cramped back room of the diner during her afternoon break, the white card clutched in her trembling fingers like a live wire. It was the 31st of December in the year 2025, the last day of a year that had brought nothing but more hardship. The morning had been merciless. Jacob had woken coughing harder than usual, his small face flushed, asking for milk that wasn't there. She had given him water and the last crumb of bread, promising better tomorrow, while her own stomach twisted in painful knots. Tips had been scarce. One table had left without paying at all, and the manager had docked her wages for the shortage. Now, in the quiet between rushes, doubt and desperation warred inside her. Mrs. Alvarez's warning echoed, "That man's world is poison." Yet the memory of Vincent Moretti's eyes, those piercing blue eyes filled with pain and something unreadable, pulled at her. Curiosity, guarded and fearful, won out. With a shaky breath, she typed the number into her phone and sent a simple text. "This is Emily Harper. Marco gave me this number last night." The reply came almost instantly. "Thank you for reaching out. Mr. Moretti would like to meet you today to express his gratitude. Would 3 o'clock at Rossi's Trattoria in North Beach be possible? It's quiet, private, and safe." Emily stared at the screen, heart pounding. Rossi's Trattoria, one of the upscale Italian restaurants everyone knew belonged to Vincent Moretti. Fear flooded her, mingling with confusion. Safe? Nothing about this felt safe. But the word gratitude tugged at the part of her that still believed kindness mattered. And Jacob's cough this morning, the specialist bill waiting unopened. She typed back before courage failed. "I can be there." The rest of the shift passed in a haze. Her legs trembled from hunger. Dizziness came in waves when she stood too long. Maria noticed again. "You're white as a ghost, hun. Sit down." "I'm okay," Emily whispered, voice soft and polite even through the strain. But she wasn't. The unfairness pressed heavier, working herself to breaking for barely enough to survive, now stepping into a world that could destroy what little she had left. She took the bus across the city, using her last bus fare, watching the neighborhoods change from rundown buildings to the colorful, bustling streets of North Beach. Rossi's Trattoria stood elegant and inviting, red awnings over large windows, the scent of garlic and fresh bread wafting out. Emily hesitated on the sidewalk, her worn coat and thin frame stark against the polished doorway. Shame burned in her chest. She looked like someone who didn't belong. Inside, the restaurant was nearly empty, closed to the public for a private event, the hostess explained quietly. Soft lighting glowed over white tablecloths, crystal glasses sparkling, the air warm and fragrant. A world of comfort and plenty that made Emily's empty stomach cramp harder. Marco met her at the entrance, his expression respectful. "Miss Harper, thank you for coming. This way." He led her to a secluded corner booth where Vincent Moretti sat waiting. He rose slowly, still moving carefully after the heart attack, tall and commanding, in a tailored dark suit that spoke of wealth and power. His fair-skinned face held lines of strain, but his blue eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that stole her breath. The moment their gazes met again, the same electric pull from the parking lot surged through him, fiercer now. Love, passionate, overwhelming, burning, tore through every defense. She was thinner than he remembered, pale from hardship, yet her quiet dignity shone like light in darkness. Guilt and desire collided violently inside him. He wanted to fall to his knees and beg forgiveness for the life his world had stolen from her, while simultaneously vowing to give her everything she had ever been denied. Emily felt the weight of his stare, confusion and fear swirling with an inexplicable pull. Her voice came out timid. "Mr. Moretti, I'm glad you're okay." "Please sit," he said, voice low and warm, gesturing to the booth, "and call me Vincent." They sat across from each other, a basket of warm bread and olive oil placed between them by a discreet server. The scent made Emily's mouth water painfully. She hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. Vincent noticed the way her eyes flickered to it, the subtle tremble in her hands, and remorse twisted sharper in his chest. "I owe you my life," he began quietly. "The doctors confirmed it. The aspirin in those first minutes made all the difference." Emily shook her head slightly. "Anyone would have—" "No," he interrupted gently but firmly. "They didn't. You did. When everyone else walked away." Silence stretched, heavy with unspoken things. Vincent leaned forward. "I need to know why. You spent your last money. You have a son. You're struggling. Why help a stranger like me?" Her eyes filled with tears she fought to hide. "Because you were dying," she whispered. "And my grandmother taught me kindness costs nothing. Sometimes it's all we have." The words struck him like a blade. His heart, already torn by guilt, shattered further. He reached into his jacket and slid a photograph across the table. A younger version of himself beside a dark-haired girl, perhaps 10 years old, smiling brightly. "This is my sister, Angela. She died young because our family couldn't afford the care she needed." Emily's throat tightened. "After that," Vincent continued, voice thick with emotion, "I started Angela's Hope Foundation. Quietly. It helps families with medical bills, housing, whatever they need. No publicity, no strings. We've helped thousands over the years." Emily stared, shock and confusion deepening. The feared Vincent Moretti ran a secret charity? The disparity hit her like a wave, the man before her in bespoke luxury, while she rationed breadcrumbs. "I want to help you," he said earnestly. "Money for bills, a better job. One of my legitimate restaurants needs a manager, full benefits, health coverage for Jacob's asthma, whatever you need." Horror and suspicion flared. I can't accept that. I didn't do it for repayment." "I know," he said, eyes burning with intensity. "That's why I have to. Please, let me do this." The server brought plates unbidden, simple pasta, fresh salad, things Emily hadn't tasted in years. Vincent encouraged her gently. "Eat, please." She hesitated, humiliation burning, then took a small bite. Flavor exploded on her tongue. Tears slipped free. Vincent watched, his own food untouched, heart tearing violently between joy at easing her hunger and agony at knowing how deep her need ran. Outside, unbeknownst to them, tension simmered. A black sedan had followed Emily's bus at a distance, men from a rival Oakland faction probing weaknesses while Vincent recovered. They lingered across the street now, watching the restaurant entrance. Marco spotted them, stepped out for a tense sidewalk confrontation. Low voices, hard stares, veiled warnings exchanged. No blows, but the air crackled with threat. Marco returned inside, face grim, reporting quietly to Vincent. Vincent's jaw tightened, but his focus remained on Emily. "Tomorrow," he said softly, "something will happen. Don't be scared. Just trust that I will never let harm come to you or your son." Emily looked up, fear and curiosity mingling with something new, warmth at being seen, truly seen, for the first time in years. Confusion numbed her thoughts. This powerful man, whose world terrified her, looked at her with eyes that held torment and fierce protectiveness. She did not yet know the full truth of how their lives were already entwined by tragedy. She only knew that in this warm, fragrant booth, across from wealth she could barely comprehend, a door had opened to possibilities that both terrified and beckoned. And Vincent, watching her eat the first full meal in longer than she could remember, felt love surge hotter than ever, a passionate vow to rewrite every injustice she had endured, even as guilt whispered he might be the cause of the greatest one. In the quiet warmth of Rossi's trattoria, two hearts, one hardened by power and remorse, one softened by hardship and grace, began to beat toward the same impossible hope. Emily Harper stepped off the late bus just after 7 in the morning on New Year's Eve, the 31st of December in the year 2025, her body heavy with exhaustion and the lingering warmth of the meal Vincent Moretti had insisted she finish at Rossi's trattoria the day before. The fog had lifted slightly, but the wind still cut through her thin coat as she walked the last blocks to her building in the Tenderloin. Her mind spun in circles, confusion, fear, and a strange, disorienting hope all tangled together. Vincent's words echoed, "Tomorrow something will happen. Don't be scared." She had barely slept. Jacob's cough had worsened in the night, each wheeze a knife in her heart. She had held him close on the narrow mattress, her own hunger returning now that the rich pasta was only a memory. The landlord's final eviction warning, slipped under the door while she was gone, lay on the table like a death sentence. 3 days to pay or leave. She had no 3 days' worth of money. She had nothing. Emily unlocked the door quietly, expecting the familiar cold stillness. Instead, a low rumble filled the air, deep mechanical thunder that vibrated through the floorboards. She froze in the doorway, heart slamming against her ribs. The street outside her building was lined with black SUVs and luxury sedans, chrome gleaming even in the gray morning light. Men in dark suits stood in perfect formation along the sidewalk, broad-shouldered, watchful, every one of them radiating quiet authority. Neighbors' curtains twitched, doors slammed shut up and down the block. Mrs. Alvarez peered from her window, face pale with terror, phone already to her ear. Emily's legs went weak. Dizziness swept over her. She gripped the doorframe to stay upright. Horror flooded her veins. This was Vincent Moretti's world, descending on her rundown street like an invading army. Whispers turned to shouts. "What did you do, girl?" Mr. Chen from across the hall burst out of his apartment, voice shaking. "You brought the North Beach boss here? We got kids in this building." Others gathered in the hallway, faces twisted with anger and fear. "I told you," Mrs. Alvarez cried, stepping into the corridor. "I warned you that man is poison. Now look, they're here for us all." Emily backed against the wall, numbness spreading through her limbs. I didn't. He said he wanted to thank me." "Thank you?" Mr. Chen spat. "This ain't gratitude. This is a takeover." Jacob appeared at her side, rubbing sleep from his eyes, clutching her leg. "Mommy, why is everyone yelling? Who are all the cars?" She pulled him close, shielding him, her voice trembling but soft. "It's okay, baby. Stay with me." Outside, the rumble grew as more vehicles arrived. A large covered truck pulled up, followed by another. Men began unloading, boxes, furniture, bags of groceries. Emily watched through the window in stunned silence as a brand new, sturdy dining table was carried toward her building, followed by a real bed frame, mattresses still wrapped in plastic, bags overflowing with fresh produce, winter coats in children's sizes. Vincent Moretti stepped out of the lead SUV, moving carefully but with unmistakable command. He wore a long, dark overcoat against the chill, his presence drawing every eye. The street fell silent except for the wind. Neighbors retreated behind doors, peeking through cracks. Marco approached the small crowd gathered on the steps, hands raised peacefully. "Folks, we're not here for trouble. We're here because of Emily Harper." Mrs. Alvarez's voice rose shrill from her doorway. "Then why bring an army? Why block our street?" Vincent walked forward slowly, his expression calm but carrying the weight of authority that quieted even the wind. He stopped at the bottom of the steps, looking up at the fearful faces, then directly at Emily, standing pale and trembling in her doorway, with Jacob clutched to her side. His heart tore violently at the sight, her thin frame swallowed by the oversized coat, dark circles under her eyes that still held quiet strength, the little boy coughing softly against her. Guilt surged hotter than ever, mingled with love so fierce it nearly brought him to his knees. This was the woman who had saved him with nothing, and he had let her live like this. The passionate need to protect her, to erase every trace of hardship, burned through him like fire. "I understand your fear," Vincent said, voice steady and resonant. "You see the cars, the suits, my name, and you think danger. I get it. But Emily Harper saved my life 2 nights ago when no one else would. She spent her last dollars on a stranger everyone else abandoned." Silence rippled outward. A few doors creaked open wider. Vincent continued, eyes never leaving Emily's. "She didn't know who I was. She didn't care. She saw a human being dying, and she acted. That kind of kindness, it's rarer than anything money can buy." He turned to the men unloading. "Bring it in, everything for Miss Harper and her son." Neighbors watched in stunned disbelief as boxes were carried up the narrow stairs. A solid wood kitchen table with matching chairs. A real bed for Jacob with bright new bedding. Bags of groceries, hearty pasta, fresh milk, eggs, fruit, meats wrapped carefully. Winter coats in Emily's and Jacob's sizes. A space heater still in its box. School supplies. Toys carefully chosen for an 8-year-old boy. Emily stood frozen, tears streaming down her cheeks. Shock and confusion numbed her thoughts. Dizziness threatened again as the world tilted. This couldn't be real. Yesterday she had counted crumbs for breakfast. Today, strangers carried abundance into her barren home. Mrs. Alvarez stepped forward hesitantly. This is because of her?" Vincent nodded. "And more. Angela's hope, the foundation I run quietly, has helped families on this very block before. Rent paid anonymously, medical bills covered. You just never knew it came from us." Gasps rippled through the hallway. Mr. Chen's face softened. "My daughter's surgery last year. That was you?" Vincent inclined his head. "We don't advertise. We just help." The atmosphere shifted slowly, fear giving way to wonder, anger to reluctant gratitude. One by one, neighbors approached, some offering quiet apologies to Emily, others shaking Vincent's hand with newfound respect. Emily remained in the doorway, clutching Jacob, tears falling unchecked. The disparity crushed her, these men of wealth and power unloading riches into her life of scraping and want. Humiliation mingled with overwhelming relief. She met Vincent's gaze across the crowd, and in that moment something passed between them again. His eyes burning with fierce love and torment, hers wide with fear, gratitude, and the first fragile spark of trust. Outside, unnoticed in the chaos, a dark sedan idled at the end of the block, men from the rival Oakland faction watching the display. One made a quiet call. Tensions were rising. Vincent's show of vulnerability after the heart attack had emboldened them. A bold confrontation brewed, but for now, the street belonged to kindness. Emily whispered to Jacob, voice breaking, "It's okay, baby. They're helping us." And in the midst of fear transforming into hope, in the quiet moments between unloading boxes and neighbors' hesitant smiles, Emily Harper felt the first crack in the walls around her heart. Walls built by years of loss and poverty, now trembling under the weight of a powerful man's fierce, passionate devotion. Vincent watched her from below, guilt and love tearing him apart, vowing silently that this was only the beginning. Whatever it cost him, whatever rivals rose against him, he would protect her and her son with everything he had. The new year was coming, and with it, everything was about to change. Emily Harper stood in the middle of her tiny studio apartment, surrounded by the impossible. It was still New Year's Eve morning, the 31st of December in the year 2025, and the narrow space that had felt like a cage only hours ago now looked like a dream she was afraid to believe in. The new wooden dining table gleamed under the single bulb, 4 sturdy chairs tucked neatly around it. A real bed with a proper frame and thick mattress stood where the old sagging mattress on the floor had been. Jacob's eyes were wide with wonder as he touched the bright new bedding patterned with spaceships, his small fingers tracing the fabric as though it might vanish. Boxes of groceries lined the counter, fresh milk in glass bottles, eggs, apples so red they looked painted, loaves of sourdough still fragrant from the bakery, packages of chicken and pasta and cheese. Winter coats hung by the door, one small and warm for Jacob, one adult size that actually fit Emily's narrow shoulders. A space heater hummed quietly in the corner, chasing away the chill that had lived in the walls for years. Neighbors who had shouted accusations only minutes before now helped carry the last items upstairs, their faces softened with awe and quiet apologies. Mrs. Alvarez set a bag of oranges on the table with trembling hands. "I was wrong, child. I'm sorry. This is a miracle." Emily could only nod, tears streaming silently down her pale cheeks. Shock numbed her thoughts. Dizziness came in waves as she tried to take it all in. Yesterday she had rationed crumbs and feared eviction. Today abundance filled every corner. The disparity crushed her. These gifts from a world of wealth and power pouring into her life of scraping and humiliation. She felt exposed, pitiful, as though her poverty had been laid bare for all to see. Vincent Moretti stood just inside the doorway, watching her with eyes that held a storm. The sight of her, thin, malnourished, sleep-deprived, yet standing tall with quiet dignity amid the transformation, tore at him with violent force. Guilt roared through his chest, hotter and more consuming than any rival confrontation he had ever faced. This woman had saved his life with her last $10, and he had allowed her to suffer like this? Love surged alongside the remorse, passionate, overwhelming, a burning need to shield her from every cold wind, every empty night. He wanted to drop to his knees and beg forgiveness for the pain his world had already caused her, even if she did not yet know the full truth. He stepped forward slowly, pulling a thick envelope from his coat. "Emily." She turned, startled by the sound of her name and his deep voice. Fear flickered in her eyes, mingled with confusion and the first fragile threads of gratitude. Her voice came out soft and timid. "Mr. Moretti, Vincent, this is too much. I can't." "You can," he said gently but firmly, placing the envelope in her hands. $30,000. For rent, for Jacob's doctor, for whatever you need right now. No strings. Her fingers shook as she opened it, seeing the neat stack of bills. Shock hit her like a physical blow. Numbness spread through her limbs, the room tilting. $30,000. More money than she had seen in years. Tears spilled faster. I don't know what to say." "There's more." Vincent gestured to another folder Marco handed him. "A position as manager at one of my restaurants in North Beach. Legitimate, steady. $65,000 a year to start. Full health benefits from day one. Everything Jacob needs covered. Inhalers, specialists, no copays, no choices between medicine and food ever again." Emily's knees buckled. She sank onto one of the new chairs, head in her hands, sobbing quietly. The unfairness of her life, the endless grinding poverty, the nights she had gone hungry so Jacob could eat, the humiliation of donation lines and overdue notices, crashed against this sudden, overwhelming generosity. Confusion tore at her heart. Why her? Why this man whose name alone brought fear to an entire city? Vincent knelt before her, slowly, carefully, the powerful boss of San Francisco on his knees in a run-down Tenderloin apartment. His voice was thick with emotion. "You gave me a second chance with your last dollars. Let me give you one." Their eyes met, and in that moment the air between them crackled. Emily saw the torment in his gaze, the depth of feeling that went beyond gratitude. Vincent saw the quiet strength that had kept her standing through years of hardship, and love ignited brighter, fiercer, a passionate vow that shook him to his core. He wanted to pull her into his arms, promise her the world, erase every tear. The inner conflict was excruciating, desire warring with guilt, power humbled by grace. Jacob tugged at Emily's sleeve. "Mommy, why are you crying? Is it happy crying?" She pulled him close, laughing through sobs. "Yes, baby, happy tears." Outside, the unloading finished. Neighbors gathered in small groups, voices hushed with wonder. Mrs. Alvarez hugged Emily tightly. "You showed us all something today, child. Real kindness." Vincent rose, giving her space, but his eyes never left her face. Marco approached quietly. "Boss, the Oakland crew, they're still watching from the corner. Want me to handle it?" Vincent's expression hardened for a moment, then softened as he glanced at Emily. Peacefully. No scenes here. Marco nodded and stepped outside. Minutes later, Emily watched from the window as Marco approached the dark sedan idling down the block. The confrontation was tense but controlled. Low voices, hard stares, gestures sharp but restrained. The sedan pulled away slowly, message delivered. Vincent's world protecting hers, even from a distance. Emily turned back to the room, taking in the new couch, soft cushions where the sagging one had been, the full refrigerator, the heater's gentle warmth. She walked to the window, watching Vincent speak quietly with his men below. Power radiated from him, yet he had knelt before her. Confusion swirled with something warmer, deeper, a spark she didn't yet have a name for. Vincent looked up, catching her gaze through the glass. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. Two lives divided by everything, now connected by one desperate night in a foggy parking lot. His heart pounded with love so intense it hurt. Hers fluttered with fear, gratitude, and the first faint stirrings of trust. He raised a hand in a small wave, then turned to leave, giving her space to breathe in this new reality. Emily watched the SUVs pull away, the street returning to quiet. She closed the curtains, leaned against the wall, and let the tears come again. Tears of relief, of shock, of a heart beginning to crack open after years of careful guarding. Jacob ran to the new bed, bouncing with joy. "Mommy, look! I have a real bed." She joined him, pulling him into her arms, the weight of $30,000 in the envelope on the table, the promise of a job and health coverage folding around them like a blanket. For the first time in years, hope felt real, and in the quiet, condensed stillness of a life forever changed, Emily Harper felt the first true spark, the dangerous, confusing, overwhelming beginning of something she could not yet name, but that burned in answer to the fierce love already consuming Vincent Moretti's heart. The new year was only hours away, and with it, the world had tilted on its axis. The first weeks of January in the year 2025 passed in a blur for Emily Harper, each day a strange mixture of relief and disorientation. The new apartment, still the same cramped studio in the Tenderloin, but now warm, furnished, and full, felt like borrowed time. She woke each morning expecting it to vanish. The sturdy table where Jacob ate real breakfasts, the full refrigerator humming quietly, the envelope of cash tucked safely in a drawer. She started her new job as manager at Vincent Moretti's North Beach restaurant, a world of crisp linens and soft lighting that made her old diner shifts feel like another lifetime. The salary appeared in her bank account, steady, generous, impossible. Health insurance cards arrived for her and Jacob, covering every inhaler, every specialist visit without question. Yet the contrast tore at her heart. She had spent years thin from hunger, cold from broken heaters, humiliated by donation lines and shut-off notices. Now, warmth and plenty surrounded her, gifted by a man whose name still made neighbors whisper. Confusion numbed her thoughts in quiet moments. Dizziness came when she stood too quickly, as though her body hadn't caught up with the change. Fear lingered, fear that it would be taken away, fear of what Vincent might expect in return. Vincent watched from a careful distance, his love growing more fierce and painful with every report Marco brought. He attended Jacob's school play incognito, standing in the back of the auditorium, heart clenching as the boy beamed on stage without a single cough. He ensured specialists saw Jacob weekly, anonymous payments covering tests for the rare complication threatening his lungs. But guilt consumed him anew each time he saw Emily, paler than she should be, eyes still shadowed from years of worry. He knew the full truth now, confirmed quietly. The officer killed in that long-ago crossfire had been her husband. The knowledge was a blade in his chest, twisting deeper every day. He began appearing in small ways, late-night deliveries of fresh soup when Jacob was ill, a quiet envelope of additional funds slipped under her door for new clothes. Emily found him waiting outside the restaurant after closing one foggy evening, snow flurries rare for San Francisco, swirling under the streetlights. "I wanted to see how you're settling in," he said simply, hands in his coat pockets. She hesitated, then invited him up for coffee, her first time asking him into her home. The apartment glowed warmly now, the space heater humming, Jacob asleep on his real bed. They sat at the new table, steam rising from mugs. Silence stretched, heavy with unspoken things. Emily spoke first, voice soft and timid. "Jacob's doctor says the new treatment is working. He hasn't had a bad night in weeks. I don't know how to thank you." Vincent's jaw tightened. "You don't owe me thanks. You saved my life." She looked down at her cup. "It doesn't feel real, all of this." She gestured to the room. "I keep waiting to wake up and find it gone." The words struck him like a blow. He leaned forward, voice thick. "It's yours, all of it, and more if you need." Their eyes met, and the spark from before flared brighter. Emily felt warmth spread through her chest, gratitude shifting into something deeper, more dangerous. Vincent's gaze held torment and fierce tenderness. Love burned so intensely he could barely breathe. He reached into his coat and slid a folder across the table. "I had some old news clippings gathered for the foundation records, about families we've helped." Emily opened it curiously. Newspaper articles, photos. One caught her eye, an old report from years ago. A police officer killed in a botched confrontation between rival factions. The photo of the grieving young widow. Her own face stared back, younger, devastated, holding a toddler Jacob. The world stopped. Shock hit her like ice water. Dizziness crashed over her. The room spun violently. She gripped the table, breath coming in gasps. This was... Vincent's face drained of color. He had not meant for her to see it. Not yet. Not like this. Emily. She stood abruptly, chair scraping, numbness spreading through her limbs. Your world, the confrontation, it was you. Your people. Tears filled her eyes, anger, grief, betrayal surging anew. The unfairness tore at her heart with violent intensity. The man who had taken everything from her was now the one giving everything back. Vincent rose slowly, hands open. I didn't know it was your husband. Not then. When I learned later, it destroyed me. I've carried it every day since. His voice broke. He dropped to his knees before her, again the powerful boss humbled in her small apartment. I ordered the action that went wrong. I am responsible. The guilt, it's eaten me alive. Angela's hope, every family I've helped, it was never enough. And then you, tears glistened in his eyes. You saved my life, knowing nothing, spending your last dollars on the man whose world took your husband. Emily backed against the wall, sobs tearing from her throat. Confusion and pain numbed her thoughts. The room tilted as old grief crashed against new. Why didn't you tell me? I was terrified, he whispered. Terrified you'd hate me, that I'd lose the only light I found in years. Silence stretched, thick and aching. Emily slid down the wall until she sat on the floor, head in her hands, years of suppressed grief pouring out. Vincent stayed on his knees, several feet away, giving her space, his own heart shattering. Minutes passed, quiet, condensed, unbearable. Then Emily looked up, eyes red but steady. Jacob, he'll never know his father because of that night. Vincent's head bowed. I know. She wiped her face, voice trembling but clear. But you've given him a chance to breathe, to live without fear of the next attack. You've given me hope I thought was gone forever. He looked up, hope and fear warring in his eyes. I hate what happened, she said quietly. I'll always hate it. But I see you carrying it too. And she took a shaky breath. I forgive you. Not for you, for Jacob, for me, so we can keep breathing. Vincent's breath caught on a sob. He crawled forward slowly, stopping at her feet. Emily, I don't deserve it. Maybe not, she whispered, but I'm giving it anyway. In that moment, something shifted irrevocably. Emily reached out, trembling hand touching his cheek. Vincent turned into it, eyes closing, tears falling. Love, hers tentative and new, his long-burning and fierce, met in the space between them. Outside, tension simmered. The Oakland rivals, emboldened by rumors of Vincent's heart attack and his sudden focus on charity, pushed harder. A bold confrontation erupted one evening near the restaurant, cars blocking the street, men facing off under streetlights, voices low and threatening. Vincent handled it himself, stepping out with calm authority, Marco at his side. No violence, but the message was clear. Boundaries held. Emily watched from the restaurant window, heart pounding with new fear. For him now, as well as herself. When he returned inside, coat dusted with snow, she met him without words, wrapping her arms around him. He held her tightly, burying his face in her hair, love and remorse colliding in a storm that left them both shaking. Late nights became theirs, talking over coffee after closing, sharing grief and dreams. Stolen glances turned to lingering touches. One snowy evening, fog thick outside the restaurant windows, Vincent walked her home. At her door, snowflakes catching in her hair, he cupped her face gently. I love you, he said, voice raw. From the first moment you knelt beside me in that parking lot. I've loved you every second since. Emily's breath caught, heart racing with fear and longing. She rose on her toes and kissed him, soft at first, then desperate, years of guarded loneliness pouring out. Vincent responded with passionate intensity, arms wrapping around her as though she were the only thing keeping him anchored. The kiss deepened under the streetlight, snow falling silently around them. Two hearts, hers long starved of tenderness, his long burdened by guilt, finally began to heal in each other's fire. Forgiveness had opened the door. Love, fierce, confusing, overwhelming, walked through it. And in the quiet warmth of a new year, Emily Harper and Vincent Moretti stepped into the rising tension of a love that would change everything. February winds swept cold and sharp through San Francisco in the year 2025, carrying the scent of rain and salt from the bay. Emily Harper's life had settled into a rhythm that still felt like a dream she feared waking from. The restaurant in North Beach thrived under her careful management. Jacob's health improved with every specialist visit, and the small apartment in the Tenderloin, once a place of constant want, now held warmth, food, and quiet laughter. Yet every night, as she tucked Jacob into his real bed and sat at the sturdy table with a full cup of tea, the old shadows lingered. Memories of empty cupboards, of nights when hunger kept her awake, of the humiliating fear of eviction. They rose like ghosts, making her clutch the blanket tighter around her shoulders, even in the heated room. Vincent Moretti's love had become the steady flame in her days. Their evenings together, long talks after closing, walks along fog-shrouded streets, stolen kisses that grew more desperate with each passing week, filled the hollow places poverty had carved in her heart. He was gentle with her, fierce in his protection, tormented by the past he could never undo. She saw the guilt in his eyes whenever Jacob laughed freely, saw the way he carried the weight of her forgiveness like a sacred burden, and she loved him for it, loved him with a passion that frightened her in its intensity, a love born from gratitude, shared grief, and the simple miracle of being seen. But beneath the surface, danger gathered. Marco, Vincent's lieutenant, the man who had handed Emily the card that night in the parking lot, the one Vincent trusted most, watched the changes with growing unease. Vincent had always been ruthless when needed, calculated, unbreakable. Now he smiled too often, spoke of stepping back from certain operations, poured more resources into Angela's hope. To Marco, ambition burning cold in his chest, it looked like weakness. The Oakland rivals had noticed too, probing with small incursions, delayed shipments, quiet threats along the waterfront. Marco saw opportunity. One crisp February evening, Vincent arrived at Emily's apartment with a small box of Christmas ornaments he had saved. Simple glass stars and wooden figures, remnants of happier times with his sister Angela. Jacob had run out to greet him on the sidewalk, arms wide, calling, "Vincent!" with the pure joy of a child who finally felt safe. Vincent knelt to catch him, laughing, the sound rich and genuine. Emily watched from the doorway, heart swelling with love so fierce it ached. That was when the black sedan rounded the corner too fast. Shots cracked the night, sharp, controlled bursts from a silenced weapon. Vincent moved without thought, twisting to shield Jacob with his body, pushing the boy behind him as glass shattered and metal screamed. Pain exploded in his shoulder and side. He staggered but stayed upright, shoving Jacob toward Emily's reaching arms. "Inside, now!" he roared, voice raw with command and terror. Emily screamed, grabbing Jacob and pulling him through the door as more shots rang out. Neighbors' lights flicked on, shouts echoed down the street. Vincent's men, stationed discreetly nearby, poured from vehicles, returning disciplined fire that forced the attackers to peel away in a screech of tires. Vincent collapsed against the building wall, blood soaking his coat dark, breath coming in ragged gasps. Emily dropped to her knees beside him in the snow-dusted sidewalk, cradling his head, her hands instantly red. Horror flooded her, cold, numbing, violent. Dizziness crashed over her. The world narrowed to his pale face and the warmth leaving his body. "No, no, no, Vincent, look at me," she sobbed, voice breaking. "Stay with me, please." His eyes found hers, blue dimming but fierce with love. "Emily, love you, keep you safe." Jacob wailed from the doorway, "Mommy, Vincent's hurt." Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Vincent's men formed a protective ring, faces grim. One pressed a cloth to the worst wound, voice urgent. "Boss, hold on, ambulance is coming." Emily rocked him gently, tears falling onto his coat, her heart tearing apart with a pain deeper than any poverty had ever inflicted. This man, this powerful, tormented man who had pulled her from despair, now bled in her arms because of the world he could not fully escape. Confusion and rage swirled with love so intense it felt like burning. How could life be this cruel? To give her hope, love, safety, only to threaten taking it away? Vincent's hand found hers, grip weakening but desperate. "I'm sorry for everything." "Don't you dare apologize," she whispered fiercely. "Don't you dare leave us." The ambulance arrived in a blur of lights and urgent voices. Paramedics worked fast, loading him onto the stretcher as Emily clung to his hand, refusing to let go. Jacob clung to her leg, sobbing. They rode together to the hospital. Emily's blood-stained coat wrapped around the boy, her mind numb with fear. In the waiting room, hours stretched into agony. Marco arrived, face ashen. "We got plates on the car, Oakland crew. Someone tipped them to your routine here." Vincent survived surgery. Critical, but stable, doctors said. Bullets had missed vital organs by inches. Emily sat by his bedside in the private room, holding his hand as machines beeped steadily, snow falling softly outside the window. When his eyes fluttered open hours later, they sought her immediately. "Emily." His voice was weak, raw. She leaned close, tears falling again. "I'm here. Jacob's safe, with Mrs. Alvarez." Relief flooded his face, then torment. "I promised no harm would come to you." "And it didn't," she said fiercely. "You protected him. You protected us." But inside, the tearing grew unbearable. Love for her, passionate, all-consuming, collided with the guilt of bringing danger to her door. He had vowed redemption, yet his past still bled into her present. Days later, as Vincent recovered, evidence surfaced, a traced phone call, a pattern of quiet leaks. Marco's ambition laid bare. He had fed information to the rivals, believing Vincent's softness would doom the family, planning to step in after the hit. Vincent confronted him in the hospital room, voice cold despite the pain, guards present. Marco's denials crumbled under proof. Betrayal from within, from the man he had trusted like a brother, cut deeper than bullets. Marco was removed quietly, permanently sidelined. No spectacle, only the cold finality of broken trust. Vincent lay alone after, staring at the ceiling, heart torn anew. Love for Emily burned brighter through the pain. He would dismantle every dangerous piece of his empire if needed. For her, for Jacob, for the future he now craved more than power. Emily arrived that evening, Jacob asleep in the waiting room with a guard. She climbed carefully onto the bed beside Vincent, curling against his uninjured side. They held each other in silence, snow tapping the window. "I was so scared," she whispered. "Scared I'd lose you before we really began." He pressed his lips to her forehead. "You won't, I swear it, whatever it takes." Love, fierce, passionate, forged in blood and forgiveness, wrapped around them tighter than any blanket. In the quiet hum of machines and falling snow, they clung to each other, hearts beating through the pain toward a future neither had dared dream of only months before. And outside, the city moved on, unaware that in a hospital room overlooking the bay, a powerful man and a once destitute woman had found in each other the strength to heal the deepest wounds. Spring arrived gently in San Francisco in the year 2025, cherry blossoms drifting like soft pink snow along the streets of North Beach and the Tenderloin alike. Vincent Moretti left the hospital on a bright March morning, shoulders still stiff from the wounds, but his eyes clearer than they had been in decades. The betrayal by Marco had been the final fracture, the moment he knew the old world could no longer coexist with the new life he wanted. Quietly, methodically, he began dismantling the most dangerous parts of his empire. Risky operations were shut down, certain alliances dissolved, profits redirected entirely into legitimate businesses, and Angela's Hope Foundation. Rivals tested the boundaries with tense street confrontations, cars blocking intersections near the Embarcadero, low-voiced standoffs under fog-shrouded lamps. But Vincent met each with calm authority, offering peace where possible, firm lines where necessary. No blood was spilled on his order again. Emily Harper watched the changes with quiet awe and growing love. The woman who had once counted crumbs for her son's breakfast now walked beside a man choosing redemption over power. She saw the torment ease from his eyes day by day, replaced by a fierce devotion that left her breathless. Their love deepened in the ordinary moments, cooking pasta together in her warm kitchen, reading bedtime stories to Jacob, long walks along the bay where Vincent held her hand as though she were the most precious thing in his world. It was passionate, intense, a burning flame that warmed every cold memory of poverty and loss. One golden afternoon in April, Vincent led Emily and Jacob to a quiet pier overlooking the Golden Gate Bridge, the sun glinting off the water like scattered diamonds. He knelt, not in a hospital room or on a snowy sidewalk, but on sun-warmed wood with a simple ring in his hand. "Emily," he said, voice thick with emotion, "you saved my life twice. Once with aspirin in a parking lot, once with forgiveness when I deserved none. I don't have words big enough for how I love you. Marry me. Let me spend every day making sure you and Jacob never know fear or want again." Tears filled her eyes as she nodded, pulling him close. Jacob cheered, jumping between them. They married in a small Catholic church in North Beach a month later, simple, beautiful, filled with neighbors from the Tenderloin, restaurant staff, and a few trusted old associates who had chosen the new path with Vincent. Emily wore a modest white dress. Jacob carried the rings with solemn pride. Love, boundless and colorblind, filled the pews, proof that wealth and poverty, past sins and present grace, could not separate true compassion. Together they poured their hearts into expanding Angela's hope. A vacant lot in the Tenderloin, once littered and forgotten, became the site of Harper Moretti House, a community center rising brick by brick. It opened on a bright autumn day. Medical clinics offering free care, job training rooms, after-school programs for children like Jacob, a food bank that never turned anyone away. Emily led the outreach, her once timid voice now steady as she welcomed families who reminded her of her former self. Vincent stood beside her, no longer the feared boss, but a man redeemed by love, funding every need with quiet generosity. Years passed in a rhythm of ordinary miracles. Jacob grew strong and tall, his asthma a distant memory. Emily blossomed, cheeks no longer hollow from hunger, eyes bright with purpose and love. Vincent aged gracefully, silver threading his dark hair, the lines around his eyes now from laughter more than guilt. They walked the city streets hand in hand, rich in the only currency that mattered, family, community, second chances. And on quiet evenings, they returned to that foggy parking lot where it all began. Not to remember pain, but to leave a small plaque on the pharmacy wall. Here, a small act of kindness changed everything. Harper Moretti House. The story of Emily and Vincent became a quiet legend in San Francisco, a reminder that true knowledge of the human heart transcends appearance, status, or past mistakes. It taught the lesson that real education comes not from wealth or power, but from choosing compassion when it costs the most. Knowledge of suffering makes us kinder. The lesson of forgiveness heals both giver and receiver. Education in love, patient, fierce, colorblind love, is the greatest knowledge we can gain. The lesson that no one is beyond redemption became their daily education. Knowledge shared through service creates ripples that outlast any empire. If this story moved you, remember these lessons in your own life. Choose kindness even when it's hard. Offer forgiveness even when it hurts. Seek the education that comes from walking in another's shoes. Let knowledge of shared humanity guide you. And may that lesson bring light to every dark night. To everyone watching this video on Alex Truths, thank you for joining us on this journey. We wish you good health, a joyful life, and daily peace in your hearts. Please subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share Alex Truths with your friends so together we can enjoy many more engaging stories every day. Tell us in the comments, how did this story make you feel? Have you ever experienced or witnessed a moment when kindness or forgiveness changed everything? We truly want to hear the emotions from deep within your hearts. Until next time, take care, and we'll see you again in the next video. Disclaimer: all stories on this channel are fictional and created solely for entertainment purposes. Any resemblance to real people, events, or places is purely coincidental.